people say dashcams are for insurance claims and viral videos. They're wrong. Mine became evidence in a criminal case. I'm Daniel Carter, 42, dispatch supervisor at Riverside Freight in Phoenix. I coordinate trucks that move things people need but never think about. 3 weeks ago, I was idling at a red light on Camelback Road when a silver Audi slammed into my rear bumper hard enough to crack my taillight and rattle my teeth. The driver didn't look panicked or apologetic when he climbed out. He looked satisfied. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. The dashcam caught everything. His face, the deliberate acceleration, the smirk before impact. What it also caught, 3 days earlier in the same parking lot, was my wife Emma climbing into that same silver Audi and kissing the driver like she'd been holding her breath for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where normal ended. Emma and I met during a company softball game 7 years ago. She worked in accounting for a competing freight company, and we spent the first inning talking trash about each other's teams before realizing we had more in common than not. We liked dive bars over wine bars, road trips over resorts, and the kind of honesty that doesn't require a filter. 6 months later, we moved into a rental house in Tempe with a backyard big enough for a grill and a dog we said we'd get when things settled down. Things never settled, but we were happy in the chaos. She kept the books balanced. I kept the routes running. We split bills down the middle and never went to bed angry, or so I thought. Our life wasn't flashy. We drove used cars and saved coupons. Friday nights meant takeout and a movie on the couch. Saturdays were for errands and the farmer's market if we woke up early enough. Sundays, we slept in and pretended the work week wasn't coming. It was ordinary in the way that feels like home when you're living it and like a dream when it's gone. I noticed the distance slowly, the way you notice a tire losing air. Small things first. She stopped asking about my day. Her phone became a third person in our conversations, always present, always demanding attention. When I reached for her hand while watching television, she'd hold it for a moment before finding a reason to pull away. Get more water. Adjust the blanket. Check a message that apparently couldn't wait. I told myself she was stressed. Her company had merged with a larger firm, and the transition meant longer hours and tighter deadlines. She came home later, left earlier, and spent weekends catching up on reports she said were overdue. I picked up the slack without complaint because that's what you do when you're a team. I cooked dinners she barely touched. I folded laundry she didn't notice. I watered plants she'd once obsessed over and watched them wilt anyway. Then came the business trip. Dallas, she said. 3 days. Quarterly review with the new corporate office. She packed light, kissed me on the cheek, and promised to text when she landed. The first night, I got a message. Busy day. Love you. The second night, nothing. The third night, a photo of her hotel room view with a caption about missing home. It felt rehearsed, like she was checking boxes instead of checking in. When she returned, she looked different. Not tired, not stressed. Lighter, like she'd left something heavy in Texas. She hugged me at the door, but it was the kind of hug you give relatives at reunions, polite and brief. I asked how it went. She said fine, then disappeared into the bedroom to unpack. I stood in the kitchen, listening to drawers open and close, and felt a knot form in my chest that had nothing to do with indigestion. The following week, I installed a dashcam. Not because I suspected her, but because our neighborhood had seen a string of hit-and-runs, and my truck was old enough that any damage would total it. The camera was cheap, something I ordered online after reading reviews from people who swore by them. It recorded front and rear, saved footage to a memory card, and had a motion sensor that activated when the vehicle was parked. I mounted it behind the rearview mirror, plugged it in, and forgot about it. Life continued in its new, uncomfortable shape. Emma stayed late at the office more often. I ate dinners alone and fell asleep to the sound of her typing in the next room. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd smile and say she was fine, just busy. The word fine became a wall I couldn't climb. One evening, I found a receipt in the pocket of her blazer while sorting laundry. Dinner for two at a steakhouse downtown. The date matched one of her late nights. The total was more than we'd spend on groceries for a week. I held the receipt and felt the floor tilt slightly. When she came home, I showed it to her. She glanced at it and shrugged. "Client dinner," she said. "The firm covers it." I asked why she hadn't mentioned it. She said she didn't think it mattered. The conversation ended there, but the receipt stayed in my wallet like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. The dashcam footage piled up quietly. Drives to work. Trips to the grocery store. Nothing interesting until the day I reviewed the previous week's recordings on a whim. People who've never checked dashcam footage don't know the tedium. Hours of pavement, traffic lights, and radio static. I was about to delete it all when I saw her. Emma, walking across the parking lot of a shopping center I didn't recognize. She stopped beside a silver Audi, and a man stepped out. Tall, tailored suit, the kind of grooming that costs money. He opened his arms, and she walked into them without hesitation. The kiss lasted long enough for 3 cars to pass in the frame. I rewound and watched again, hoping I'd misread the scene. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was innocent. But the way his hand slid down her back and the way she leaned into him left no room for misinterpretation. The timestamp said Tuesday, 2:15 in the afternoon. The day she'd texted me about running errands during her lunch break. I sat in the dark garage with my laptop balanced on the workbench and felt something inside me go quiet. Not loud anger, not dramatic heartbreak. Just a cold, mechanical silence, like a machine shutting down to prevent further damage. I saved the file and labeled it with the date. Then I went inside, made a sandwich I didn't eat, and went to bed on the couch because the bedroom felt like foreign territory. When Emma came home, she asked why I was sleeping there. I told her my back was acting up. She said she hoped I felt better and closed the bedroom door. The next morning, I drove to work and didn't say goodbye. People in their late 30s and 40s know how shock works. It doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in, fills the cracks, and hardens into something you have to chip away at piece by piece. I functioned on autopilot. Coordinated routes. Fielded calls. Signed off on manifests. My team noticed nothing because I'd learned a long time ago how to keep work and life in separate boxes. At lunch, I sat in my truck and watched the dashcam footage again. The kiss. The hand on her back. The ease with which they moved together, like choreography they'd practiced. I decided not to confront her yet. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted the full picture. People who've been through this understand the instinct. You need to know what you're dealing with before you act. Half the story is worse than no story because it leaves room for lies to grow. That evening, I came home and behaved normally. Asked about her day. Listened to her talk about spreadsheets and conference calls. Made dinner while she scrolled through her phone. We ate in front of the television, and when she laughed at something on the screen, I realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed at something I said. After she went to bed, I opened my laptop and started digging. The Audi's license plate was visible in the footage. A quick search led me to a name. Brian Holloway. A commercial real estate broker with an office in Scottsdale. His company website featured a photo of him shaking hands with a client, same tailored suit, same confident smile. His bio mentioned accolades, sales records, and a passion for connecting people with their dream properties. It didn't mention a passion for other men's wives, but I suppose that wasn't the kind of thing you advertise. I found his social media profiles next. Public, because men like him need visibility to sell. Photos of luxury cars, high-end restaurants, charity events where everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog. In one photo, he stood beside a brunette with a caption about celebrating success with his amazing team. Emma wasn't in any of the pictures, but I recognized the restaurant from the receipt in my wallet. I checked Emma's social media next, something I rarely did because I'd never had a reason to doubt her. Her accounts were private, but her tagged photos were not. In one, posted by a coworker, Emma stood in a group at a corporate mixer. Brian was 3 people to her left, cut off at the edge of the frame. The date was 6 months ago. 6 months. That's how long this had been happening, maybe longer. I closed the laptop and sat in the blue glow of the screensaver, feeling the weight of all the dinners I'd cooked, all the nights I'd waited up, all the times I'd asked if she was okay and believed her when she said yes. The decision to keep watching came naturally. Not out of masochism, but out of necessity. If this was going to end, I needed to know how deep it went. I checked the dashcam footage daily, scanning for patterns. Most days offered nothing. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the camera caught them again. Same parking lot, same Audi. This time, they didn't kiss. They talked, standing close, his hand on her shoulder. When they parted, he handed her something small, too distant for the camera to identify. She slipped it into her purse and walked to her car, glancing around as if checking for witnesses. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I recognized that look. Guilty people scan for cameras, for familiar faces, for anything that might catch them. She didn't see the dashcam because she didn't know it existed. That small oversight would become the thread that unraveled everything. Friday arrived, and Emma mentioned she'd be working late again. I told her not to worry about dinner. She thanked me, kissed my forehead like I was a child, and left. I waited an hour, then drove to her office. Her car wasn't in the lot. I checked the dashcam footage from earlier that day and saw her leave work at 5, right on time. She'd driven not toward home, but toward Scottsdale. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The pattern was clear, and patterns are harder to deny than single incidents. When she came home at 10, she apologized for being late. Said the project ran longer than expected. I nodded and told her it was fine. The word tasted bitter, but I swallowed it. That weekend, I started documenting everything. Dates, times, locations. I printed screenshots of Brian's social media. I saved every relevant dashcam file to a separate folder on an external hard drive. People who've prepared for the worst know this ritual. You gather evidence not because you want to use it, but because you need to protect yourself when the truth finally demands a reckoning. Sunday night, I sat on the back patio with a beer I didn't drink and watched the sun set over the neighborhood. The dog we never got would have liked this spot. The quiet, the shade, the sense that this was a place worth protecting. I thought about confronting her, about laying out the evidence and demanding answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the need to see how far she'd go. Maybe it was the knowledge that once I spoke, there'd be no walking it back. Monday morning, I drove to work with the dashcam running as always. The light at Camelback and 32nd Street caught me in the left lane. I was reviewing a schedule on my phone when I heard the engine rev behind me. A silver Audi, closing fast. I looked up just as it struck my bumper. The impact wasn't hard enough to deploy airbags, but it was deliberate. No skid marks. No attempt to brake. Just a straight, aggressive collision. I threw the truck into park and stepped out, already reaching for my phone. Brian Holloway climbed out of the Audi, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. He knew who I was. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the flicker of recognition that crossed his face before he put on his concerned citizen mask. "You okay?" he asked, voice smooth as a sales pitch. I didn't answer. I walked to the back of my truck and inspected the damage. Cracked taillight, dented bumper. Not totaled, but not nothing. I pulled out my phone and took photos while he stood there, hands in his pockets, watching. "We should exchange information," he said. I looked at him, really looked at him. Mid-30s, expensive watch, shoes that cost more than my truck payment. The kind of man who believes money insulates him from consequences. "You hit me on purpose," I said. He blinked, then laughed. It was a smooth sound, practiced. "That's ridiculous. I took my eyes off the road for a second. Totally my fault, but an accident. I pointed at the dashcam mounted behind my windshield. That records front and rear. It caught everything. His smile faltered. The confident mask slipped just enough for me to see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing options, deciding how to spin this. Then let's see it, he said, voice still calm. I shook my head. You'll see it when the police do. I dialed 911 and gave the operator our location. Brian stood beside his Audi, arms crossed, no longer pretending to be concerned. When the patrol car arrived, I handed the officer my information and explained what happened. Brian gave his version, all apologies and distractions, claiming he'd glanced at his phone and didn't see me stopped. The officer asked if anyone was hurt. I said no. He asked if I had the footage. I said yes. He reviewed it on my phone, his expression shifting from neutral to interested. He asked Brian to step aside and spoke to him privately. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Brian's posture change, shoulders stiffening, hands gesturing in defense. When the officer returned, he handed me a case number and said I'd be contacted by a detective. Brian was cited for reckless driving and following too closely. As the officer walked back to his patrol car, Brian approached me one last time. This is a misunderstanding, he said quietly. We can settle this without involving anyone else. I met his eyes and felt the months of silence and suspicion crystallize into something sharp. You've already involved everyone else, I said. Now you get to deal with it. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked back to his car. The Audi pulled away, and I stood there in the afternoon heat, feeling the first crack in the dam I'd been building for weeks. The footage didn't just show a collision. It showed intent. And if a judge saw it, Brian's smooth sales pitch wouldn't mean much. I drove home carefully, the damaged bumper rattling over every pothole. Emma's car was in the driveway. I parked beside it, grabbed the external hard drive from under my seat, and walked inside. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad she probably wouldn't eat. Hey, she said without looking up. How was your day? Eventful, I said. Got rear-ended at a red light. Her hands stilled. Are you okay? I'm fine. Truck's got some damage, but nothing major. She set the knife down and turned to face me. Did you call the police? I did. Got a case number and everything. She nodded, already turning back to the cutting board. That's good. Hopefully insurance covers it. I watched her hands move, efficient and detached, and realized she had no idea the man who hit me was the same man she'd been kissing in parking lots. The same man who'd handed her something secretive. The same man whose Audi I'd been cataloging in dashcam footage for weeks. The urge to tell her surged and then subsided. Not yet. Not until I knew what came next. That night, I slept on the couch again. My back was fine, but the excuse still worked. Emma didn't question it. She said goodnight from the bedroom doorway and closed the door. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and felt the pieces of a plan start to come together. The detective called 2 days later. Officer Martinez, soft-spoken but thorough. He asked me to come in and provide a formal statement along with the dashcam footage. I took a half-day off work and drove to the precinct with the external hard drive and a printed timeline I'd prepared. People in midlife know how to present information. You don't rant. You don't editorialize. You lay out facts and let them speak. Detective Martinez was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of calm demeanor that makes you trust him without knowing why. He listened as I walked him through the collision, showed him the footage, and explained that the dashcam had captured other incidents involving the same vehicle. He asked what kind of incidents. I hesitated, then decided the truth was simpler than dancing around it. The driver has been meeting with my wife, I said. I have footage of them together in parking lots. Meetings that don't look professional. Martinez's expression didn't change, but I saw the shift in his focus. He asked if I'd confronted either of them. I said no. He asked why. I told him I wanted to understand the situation fully before taking action. He reviewed the footage I'd compiled. The first meeting. The kiss. The second meeting. The hand on her shoulder. Then the collision, where Brian accelerated into my truck with no attempt to stop. Martinez played it twice, then leaned back in his chair. "This doesn't look like an accident," he said. "It looks like road rage or intimidation." I nodded. He asked if I'd had any interaction with Brian before the collision. I said no. He asked if Brian knew I was Emma's husband. I said I didn't know for certain, but based on his reaction at the scene, I believed he did. Martinez took notes, asked a few more questions, then thanked me for coming in. He said the footage was strong evidence and that he'd be following up with Brian. He also suggested I consider filing a restraining order if I felt unsafe. I told him I'd think about it. As I left the precinct, my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message and felt something harden in my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. I drove to a coffee shop near her office and parked where I had a clear view of the lot. At 6:30, Emma walked out with a coworker, laughing at something he said. She got into her car and drove west, away from home. I didn't follow. I already knew where she was going. At 8, I called her. She answered on the third ring, voice slightly breathless. "Hey, what's up?" "Just checking in," I said. "When do you think you'll be home?" She paused. "Probably another hour. We're stuck on a presentation." I heard background noise. Not office sounds. Music. Conversation. The kind of ambient noise you get in a restaurant or bar. "Take your time," I said and hung up. I sat in the parking lot until 9, then drove home. She arrived at 10:15, apologized for being late, and went straight to the shower. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. The pattern was complete. The next morning, Detective Martinez called again. He'd interviewed Brian, who admitted to the collision but claimed it was accidental. Martinez said Brian's story didn't match the footage, and he was recommending charges. He also mentioned that during the interview, Brian had become agitated and made statements that suggested he knew who I was. "What kind of statements?" I asked. Martinez hesitated. He said something about you needing to mind your own business. That your marriage problems weren't his fault. I absorbed that. So he knows. "Sounds like it," Martinez said. "I'm documenting everything. If he contacts you directly, let me know immediately." I thanked him and ended the call. Brian knew I was onto him. The collision wasn't random. It was a message. A warning to back off, delivered with a bumper instead of words. Men like Brian don't handle exposure well. They're used to operating in shadows, and when the light hits them, they lash out. I made a decision then. I wasn't backing off. I was moving forward. That evening, I told Emma we needed to talk. She looked up from her laptop, surprised. I'd been so passive lately that any assertion probably felt foreign. "Sure," she said. "What's going on?" I sat across from her at the kitchen table and placed a folder between us. Inside were printed screenshots. The dashcam footage stills. The timeline. The receipts I'd found. The social media posts. "I know about Brian," I said. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. She opened the folder, flipped through the pages, and closed it. Her hands trembled. "Daniel, I can explain." I waited. She looked at me, then at the folder, then at her hands. "It's not what you think." I laughed once, a short, bitter sound. "It's exactly what I think. The photos don't lie." She wiped her eyes, and I realized she was crying. Not the kind of crying that moves me, but the kind that feels like a strategy. "I was lonely," she said. "You've been so distant. So focused on work. I felt invisible. I let her talk. She blamed the merger, the stress, the long hours. She said Brian understood her in ways I didn't. That he made her feel valued. Every sentence was a shovel digging deeper. When she finished, I slid another piece of paper across the table. The police report from the collision. She frowned, confused. What does this have to do with anything? Brian hit my truck on purpose, I said. 3 days after I recorded you kissing him. The dashcam caught that too. Her confusion turned to shock. He what? Hit me. Deliberately. At a red light. The detective thinks it was intimidation. She stared at the report like it was written in a language she didn't speak. That doesn't make sense. Why would he do that? Because he knows I know, I said. And he's trying to scare me off. She shook her head, tears falling faster now. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Maybe she didn't. Maybe Brian acted alone. But it didn't change the fact that her choices had set this in motion. I'm filing for divorce, I said. She flinched like I'd struck her. Daniel, please. We can fix this. Counseling. I'll end it with him. We can start over. I stood and picked up the folder. You already ended us. I'm just making it official. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. The papers will be ready next week. You can sign them or not. Either way, I'm done. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't have a destination. I just drove, letting the city lights blur past until I found myself at a park near where we used to walk on Sundays. I sat on a bench and watched families pack up picnics, couples hold hands, kids chase each other across the grass. Normal life, happening all around me, while mine crumbled in slow motion. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Please come home. We need to talk. I turned the phone off and sat until the park emptied and the lights came on. When I finally went back, the house was dark. Emma's car was gone. A note on the counter said she was staying with a friend. I didn't ask which one. The next week moved like a chess game. I filed for divorce with an attorney who specialized in cases involving infidelity. I provided the evidence, the timeline, the dashcam footage. He said it was one of the clearest cases he'd seen. Emma hired her own lawyer, and the back and forth began. She wanted the house. I wanted a clean break. She claimed emotional distress. I claimed betrayal and calculated deception. Meanwhile, Detective Martinez kept me updated. Brian had been charged with reckless endangerment and assault with a vehicle. The dashcam footage was the key evidence. His lawyer tried to argue accident, but the video showed premeditation. The revving engine. The lack of braking. The deliberate aim. A court date was set. Emma tried reaching out multiple times. Texts, calls, emails. Each one a variation of the same plea. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please forgive me. I didn't respond. Silence felt more powerful than words. Then, 3 weeks after the collision, Brian showed up at my work. Security called me to the front desk, where he stood in a polo shirt and khakis, looking less polished than before. He asked if we could talk. I told security to escort him out. He raised his voice, saying I was ruining his life over a misunderstanding. I stayed calm and repeated my request. Security removed him. I filed a report with Detective Martinez, who issued a no-contact order. Brian violated it 2 days later, showing up at my house. I called the police. He was arrested for violating the order and spent the night in jail. His lawyer argued that he was trying to apologize, to make amends. The judge wasn't interested. Emma called me after hearing about the arrest. She was crying, panicking, saying this had gone too far. That Brian was a good person who made a mistake. I asked if she understood that her good person had tried to intimidate me with a 2-ton vehicle. She went quiet. The trial happened faster than I expected. Brian's lawyer tried to paint me as a jealous husband manufacturing evidence. My lawyer presented the dashcam footage, the timestamps, the expert analysis showing deliberate acceleration. The jury took 4 hours to return a guilty verdict. Brian was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with probation and community service to follow. He was also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my truck and my legal fees. Emma attended the sentencing. I saw her in the back row, face pale, hands clasped. When the verdict was read, she covered her mouth and left quickly. I didn't follow. That chapter was closed. The divorce finalized 2 months later. I kept the truck, she kept the house. We split everything else down the middle. No alimony, no drama. Just signatures and a judge's stamp. When I walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. I moved into a small apartment near work. 1 bedroom, decent kitchen, a balcony that overlooked the parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I bought a dog, a rescue mutt named Charlie who had 1 floppy ear and a habit of sleeping on my feet. The life I'd imagined with Emma didn't include starting over at 42, but the life I'd been living didn't include betrayal and car crashes either. People ask if I'm angry. I'm not. Anger is exhausting, and I've spent enough energy on this situation. What I feel is clarity. I see now that the marriage ended long before the dashcam caught Emma and Brian together. It ended in the small silences, the deflections, the nights she chose elsewhere over home. The footage just gave me proof. The dashcam still sits behind my rearview mirror, recording every drive. I check it occasionally, more out of habit than necessity. Mostly it captures mundane things. Traffic. Sunsets. Charlie's head poking out the back window. But it also reminds me that the truth has a way of surfacing, even when people try to bury it. I'm not the same man I was 6 months ago. I'm more cautious, more guarded. But I'm also more honest with myself. I know what I will and won't tolerate. I know that loyalty isn't negotiable, and neither is respect. The next relationship, if there is one, will start with those principles clearly defined. For now, I'm good with where I am. I've got a job that keeps me busy, a dog that keeps me company, and a dashcam that proved you can't outrun the truth. Brian learned that in court. Emma learned it in divorce proceedings. And I learned it the hard way, sitting at a red light, watching a silver Audi accelerate with intent. If you're reading this and you've been where I was, unsure, suspicious, caught between wanting to know and being afraid of what you'll find, here's my advice. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting what you see with your own eyes. The truth might hurt, but living in a lie hurts more. As for whether you forgive or walk away, that's your call. I chose to walk, and I don't regret it. Some bridges are meant to burn so you can stop crossing back to places that were never really home. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and somebody else's decisions when I first walked through it. Beige walls, brown carpet, the kind of neutral palette designed to offend nobody and comfort nobody either. The landlord, a woman named Ruth who wore reading glasses on a chain, handed me 2 keys and a lease that felt heavier than it should. She didn't ask why a man my age was renting a 1-bedroom alone. People in the rental business learn not to ask those questions. I moved in on a Saturday with help from 2 guys at work who didn't pry. Marcus brought his truck. Joel brought sandwiches. We hauled boxes up 2 flights of stairs while the Arizona sun turned the stairwell into an oven. My furniture looked smaller in the new space, like it had shrunk during the divorce. The couch that fit perfectly in the old living room now sat awkwardly against a wall too short for it. The bed frame I'd assembled 7 years ago squeaked in ways it never had before, protesting the move or maybe just the change. By evening, the guys had left, and I stood in the middle of the empty living room with a beer that had gone warm in my hand. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the way the refrigerator hums just to fill the void. I unpacked the essentials first. Clothes in the closet. Toiletries in the bathroom. coffee maker on the counter because some routines are non-negotiable. The rest could wait. That night, I slept on top of the covers with the windows open, listening to voices from neighboring apartments. A couple arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. A television playing a game show with canned laughter. Somewhere above me, footsteps paced back and forth like someone else couldn't sleep either. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what silence used to sound like when it was shared, when another person's breathing in the next room meant comfort instead of absence. Morning came with light that felt too bright, too insistent. I made coffee and realized I'd forgotten to buy milk. Black it was. I sat on the balcony with my mug and watched the parking lot wake up. People left for work in cars that needed washing. A woman in scrubs speed-walked to her sedan, phone pressed to her ear. A maintenance guy dragged a hose toward the landscaping, moving with the slow determination of someone who knew the day would be long regardless of how fast he started. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "You good?" I typed back a thumbs up because good was easier than honest. The truth was I felt like I'd been hollowed out and was waiting to see what would grow back. Emma had texted twice since I'd moved out. The first message said she hoped I was okay. The second said she'd left some of my mail on the porch of the old house. I didn't respond to either. The mail could wait. So could she. Work became my anchor. I showed up early, stayed late, and filled the hours with schedules and logistics that had clear solutions. Trucks needed routes. Drivers needed assignments. Freight needed to move from point A to point B, and none of it cared about my personal life. That was the gift of a job like mine. It kept moving whether you were broken or not. My coworkers noticed the change but had the decency not to comment directly. Joel asked once if I was eating enough. I told him I was fine. Marcus invited me to a barbecue at his place, and I went because saying no felt harder than showing up. I stood in his backyard with a burger I didn't taste and made small talk with people whose names I forgot as soon as they walked away. Kids ran through a sprinkler. Someone's dog knocked over a bowl of chips. It was loud and warm and everything my apartment wasn't, but I still left early, claiming an early shift the next day. The truth was I didn't know how to be around happy people yet. Their ease felt like a language I used to speak but had forgotten. I drove home with the windows down, letting the night air blast away the smell of charcoal and laughter, and felt relief when I finally closed the apartment door behind me. Charlie entered my life 3 weeks later. I wasn't planning on getting a dog. I'd gone to the shelter to drop off some old blankets Emma had left behind, things I didn't want cluttering the apartment but didn't want to throw away either. The woman at the front desk thanked me and asked if I wanted to walk through the kennels. I said sure, thinking it would take 5 minutes. The noise hit me first. Barking that echoed off concrete, a chorus of animals hoping this person, this time, would be the one who stayed. I walked slowly, reading the cards clipped to each kennel. Names, breeds, ages. Some had notes. Good with kids. Needs a yard. Prefers quiet homes. I stopped in front of a medium-sized mutt with brown and white patches in one ear that stood up while the other flopped down. His card said Charlie, approximately 3 years old, found as a stray. He didn't bark. He just sat and looked at me with eyes that seemed to understand more than a dog should. The attendant, a young guy with a name tag that said Kevin, walked over. That's Charlie. He's been here about a month. Sweet dog. House-trained. Good on a leash. Just hasn't found the right person yet. I asked why. Kevin shrugged. Sometimes it just takes time. I asked if I could meet him. Kevin unlocked the kennel, and Charlie walked out calmly, no jumping, no frenzy. He sniffed my hand, then sat beside me like we'd done this before. I crouched down and scratched behind his floppy ear. He leaned into it, eyes closing briefly. That was it. That was the moment I stopped being a guy dropping off blankets and became a guy adopting a dog. The paperwork took an hour. Background check. Verification of my lease allowing pets. A rundown of his medical history and vaccination schedule. Kevin walked me through it all with the patience of someone who'd seen every kind of adopter. When it was done, he handed me a leash and said Charlie was lucky. I wasn't sure who was luckier. Charlie rode home in the passenger seat, head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. I stopped at a pet store and bought the basics. Food, bowls, a bed, toys I wasn't sure he'd use. The clerk rang it up without comment, though I caught her smiling when Charlie sniffed a stuffed duck and wagged his tail. At the apartment, I set up his bed in the corner of the living room. He circled it twice, then lay down and sighed like he'd finally found what he'd been searching for. That night, I didn't feel the silence. Charlie snored softly from his bed, a rhythmic sound that filled the space in a way the refrigerator hum never could. I slept better than I had since the divorce, waking only once when Charlie climbed onto the bed and curled up at my feet. I didn't have the heart to move him. Routine built itself around Charlie. Morning walks before work. Evening walks after. Weekends at the dog park where he ran with other dogs and I made polite conversation with other owners. Nobody asked why I was there alone. In the world of dog parks, you're defined by your animal, not your history. Charlie was friendly, so I was the guy with the friendly dog. That was enough. The court case involving Brian moved slower than I expected. Legal proceedings have their own timeline, one that doesn't care about your need for closure. Detective Martinez kept me updated through emails that were professional and sparse. Hearings scheduled. Evidence submitted. Motions filed and denied. Brian's lawyer tried every angle. Accident. Misunderstanding. Lack of intent. But the dashcam footage was unambiguous, and the prosecution had expert testimony to back it up. I was called to testify in a preliminary hearing. The courthouse smelled like floor cleaner and stress. I sat outside the courtroom on a wooden bench that had carved initials from people who'd waited there before me. When my name was called, I walked in and took the stand. Brian sat at the defense table in a suit that looked expensive but couldn't hide the fact that he'd lost weight. His eyes met mine once, briefly, then looked away. The prosecutor, a woman named Angela Reyes who spoke with the precision of a surgeon, walked me through the events. The collision. The dashcam footage. The timeline of Emma and Brian's meetings. I answered each question clearly, sticking to facts, avoiding emotion. Brian's lawyer, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, tried to rattle me on cross-examination. Isn't it true you were spying on your wife? Isn't it true you installed the dashcam specifically to catch her? I looked at him and said the dashcam was installed for security after a string of hit-and-runs in my neighborhood. That it captured Emma and Brian was incidental. He pressed. Incidental or convenient? I said both could be true. The judge sustained an objection before he could continue, and I was dismissed. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt the weight of Brian's stare. I didn't turn around. Outside, Detective Martinez was waiting. You did good in there, he said. Steady. That matters. I asked how long until the trial. He said a few months, maybe sooner if Brian's lawyer kept pushing for delays and the judge got tired of it. I thanked him and left. Emma tried to contact me again that week. This time, it was a voicemail. Her voice sounded small, tired. Daniel, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need you to understand something. I never wanted any of this. Brian and it wasn't supposed to be serious. It just happened. And now he's facing jail time, and I feel like it's my fault. Please, if you ever cared about me, don't let this destroy him. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. The thing about voicemails like that is they're designed to shift responsibility. She wanted me to feel guilty for Brian's consequences, to believe that holding someone accountable was the same as being vindictive. I didn't call back. Whatever sympathy I'd once had for her had evaporated the moment she prioritized Brian's well-being over acknowledging what she'd done. Joel asked me one afternoon if I'd heard from Emma. We were in the break room, and he was microwaving something that smelled like regret and frozen dinners. I told him she'd called. He waited for more, and when I didn't offer it, he said, You don't owe her anything. You know that, right? I nodded. He pulled his food out of the microwave and sat across from me. My ex did something similar. Not the affair, but the blaming me for her choices. Took me a year to stop feeling responsible. He paused. You'll get there. I appreciated that he didn't push. Men at a certain age understand that some things don't need dissecting. You just acknowledge them and move on. I finished my lunch, threw away the wrapper, and went back to work. The afternoon passed with calls about delayed shipments and a driver who'd called in sick. Normal problems. Fixable problems. The kind I could solve without a lawyer or a dashcam. The dog park became a weekend ritual. Charlie loved it, and I found a strange comfort in the predictability. Same people, same dogs, same conversations about breeds and training techniques. There was a woman named Lisa who brought her golden retriever every Saturday. She was maybe late 30s, worked as a teacher, and had the kind of easy smile that made you forget the world was complicated. We talked occasionally, mostly about the dogs, sometimes about the weather or weekend plans that amounted to nothing. One Saturday, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee after the park. I hesitated, and she must have seen it because she quickly added, just as friends. No pressure. I said yes because saying no felt like admitting I wasn't ready, and I wanted to believe I was. We went to a cafe nearby, dogs tired and sprawled under the table. The coffee was decent. The conversation was easier than I expected. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't volunteer it. We talked about work, about dogs, about the strange satisfaction of finding a good parking spot on a busy day. When we left, she said it was nice and that maybe we could do it again sometime. I agreed, and we exchanged numbers. Walking back to my truck with Charlie, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not attraction, not excitement. Just normalcy. The sense that life could include small, pleasant moments again without them being weighted down by everything that came before. I didn't text Lisa right away. Part of me wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wasn't sure I wanted to start something new when the old thing hadn't fully ended. The divorce was final on paper, but emotionally it still lingered like smoke after a fire. You can't see it, but you know it's there. Brian's trial date was set for late September. I marked it on my calendar and tried not to think about it, though it sat in the back of my mind like a dentist appointment you can't cancel. Detective Martinez called 2 weeks before to go over my testimony. He said the prosecution was confident. The dashcam footage was airtight, and Brian's lawyer had failed to poke any real holes in the evidence. Still, he warned me to prepare for the defense to attack my character. They'll try to make you look vindictive, he said. Just stay calm and tell the truth. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with Charlie at my feet, staring at the ceiling and replaying everything. The collision. The footage. Emma's voicemail. Brian's smirk at the scene. Around 2 a.m, I gave up and went to the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink and sat at the table with the lights off, watching the streetlights cast shadows through the blinds. I thought about what I wanted from the trial. Justice felt like the obvious answer, but it wasn't that simple. Justice wouldn't erase the affair. It wouldn't undo the nights Emma lied about where she was. It wouldn't give me back the version of my life where I trusted people without dashcam footage. What it could do was hold someone accountable. That felt like enough. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Brian's family sat on one side, Emma among them, looking pale and out of place. My side was sparse. Marcus had taken the morning off to be there, and Detective Martinez sat near the back. The rest were strangers, people who'd come for other cases or were just curious. The trial moved methodically. Opening statements painted 2 different pictures. The prosecution described a man who used his vehicle as a weapon to intimidate someone who'd discovered his affair. The defense described a distracted driver who made a split-second mistake and was being persecuted by a vengeful husband. Both sides presented their version, and the jury sat stone-faced, absorbing it all. When I took the stand, Angela Reyes walked me through my testimony with the same precision as the preliminary hearing. I explained the dashcam installation, the footage it captured, the collision. She played the video for the jury, and the courtroom went silent. You could hear the engine rev, see the Audi accelerate, watch the impact. There was no ambiguity. Brian's lawyer cross-examined me again. He asked about my marriage, about my feelings toward Brian, about whether I'd ever confronted him before the collision. I answered each question calmly. No, I hadn't confronted him. Yes, I was angry about the affair. No, that didn't change what the footage showed. He tried to rattle me, to make me seem like a man with an axe to grind. But the footage didn't lie, and the jury could see that. The defense called Brian to the stand. He claimed he'd been looking at his phone, that he hadn't seen my truck stopped at the light. Under cross-examination, Angela Reyes tore that apart. She showed phone records proving he hadn't been on a call or texting at the time. She presented expert testimony showing the angle of impact was consistent with intentional acceleration, not a distracted glance. Brian stumbled through his answers, and by the end, even his own lawyer looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I spent that time in a small waiting room with Marcus, who'd brought a deck of cards. We played gin rummy without keeping score, just something to fill the silence. When the bailiff called us back, my heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. We filed into the courtroom, and the jury foreman stood. Guilty on all counts. Reckless endangerment. Assault with a deadly weapon. The words felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Brian's face crumpled. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. Emma covered her mouth and left the courtroom quickly, not looking at anyone. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the case and handed down 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. Brian was also ordered to pay restitution for damages and court costs. He stared straight ahead as the sentence was read, his face blank. I left the courthouse feeling lighter but not relieved. Justice had been served, but it didn't fix anything. Emma was still gone. Brian was going to jail. And I was still figuring out how to build a life from the wreckage. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder as we walked to the parking lot. "You did the right thing," he said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure right was the word. Necessary, maybe. Inevitable. That evening, I took Charlie to the park and let him run until he was too tired to do anything but flop in the grass. I sat beside him and watched the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. People walked by with their own dogs, their own lives, their own problems I'd never know about. The world kept turning, indifferent to verdicts and divorces and dashcam footage. Lisa texted me that night. "Heard about the trial. Hope you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I'm okay. Thanks for checking." She replied with a simple thumbs up, no follow-up questions, no pressure. It was the kind of response that reminded me not everyone needed the full story to offer support. The weeks after the trial settled into a new rhythm. Work continued. Charlie continued. The apartment started feeling less like a placeholder and more like home. I bought a new couch that fit the space better. I hung a few pictures on the walls. Nothing fancy, just landscapes I'd found at a thrift store, but they made the place feel less temporary. Emma reached out one more time. A letter, not a text or voicemail. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, my name written in her familiar handwriting. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. Inside, she'd written 3 pages. An apology. An explanation. A plea for understanding. She said she'd been lost, that Brian had made her feel seen in ways she hadn't felt in years. She said she never meant to hurt me, that the affair was a symptom of problems we'd both ignored. I read it once, then put it in a drawer. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't need to carry it around anymore. She could have her reasons. I could have my boundaries. Both things could exist without needing resolution. Joel asked me one afternoon if I was dating anyone. We were loading pallets, and the question came out casual, like he was asking about the weather. I told him I'd grabbed coffee with someone a few times but wasn't calling it dating. He grinned. That's how it starts. Next thing you know, you're picking out paint colors together. I laughed because the idea felt absurd and comforting at the same time. Lisa and I did grab coffee again. Then a walk. Then dinner at a quiet restaurant where we talked about everything except our pasts. She told me about her students, about the kid who always forgot his homework but remembered every dinosaur fact. I told her about a driver who'd accidentally delivered a shipment to the wrong state. We laughed at the absurdity of our jobs, at the small disasters that made the days interesting. She didn't ask about the trial or Emma, and I appreciated that more than she probably knew. When we said goodnight in the parking lot, she hugged me briefly, the kind of hug that's friendly but leaves room for more. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, not yet. But possibility. The holidays approached with the inevitability of bills and bad weather. I wasn't looking forward to them. Last year, Emma and I had hosted her family for Thanksgiving, a chaotic dinner where everyone talked over each other and someone always brought a dish nobody wanted. This year, I had an invitation from Marcus to join his family, and Lisa had mentioned her parents were hosting if I wanted to come. I thanked them both but said I'd probably keep it low-key. Thanksgiving Day, I made a small turkey breast and mashed potatoes, portions sized for one. With leftovers for Charlie. I ate on the couch while watching football I didn't care about. It wasn't sad, exactly. It was quiet. Manageable. The kind of day that didn't demand anything from me. Lisa texted around 7. Hope you had a good day. If you want company tomorrow, I'm around. I told her I'd think about it. The next day, I showed up at her place with Charlie and a bottle of wine I'd picked up at the grocery store. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her golden retriever wagging behind her. We spent the afternoon walking a trail near her neighborhood, dogs running ahead while we talked about nothing important. It felt normal in a way I'd forgotten was possible. By December, the apartment didn't feel new anymore. It felt like mine. I'd learned which floorboard creaked, which burner on the stove heated unevenly, how the neighbor above me vacuumed every Sunday at 9 a.m. Charlie had claimed the couch as his during the day and my bed at night. The routines I'd built felt solid, like they could hold weight. Work through a holiday party at a bar downtown. I almost didn't go, but Joel insisted. You need to get out, he said. Be around people who aren't dogs or freight manifests. I relented and showed up late, staying long enough to have one beer and make small talk with coworkers I rarely saw outside the office. It wasn't terrible. I left after an hour, and nobody seemed to notice. Lisa invited me to a New Year's Eve party her friends were hosting. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The party was loud and crowded, the kind of event I used to enjoy before everything happened. I stayed near the edge of the room, nursing a drink and watching people laugh and dance like the year-ending mattered. At midnight, Lisa found me and kissed me on the cheek. Happy New Year, she said. I said it back and meant it. The new year arrived with the weight of expectation. People talked about fresh starts and resolutions, about leaving the past behind. I didn't make any grand declarations. I just kept showing up. To work. To the dog park. To coffee with Lisa. Small steps that added up to something that felt like progress. Brian served his time quietly. I didn't follow his case closely after the sentencing, but Detective Martinez mentioned once that he'd been a model inmate, head down, no trouble. He'd be out in a year with good behavior. I didn't care. His consequences were his to carry, not mine. Emma moved out of state. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd taken a job in Colorado, a fresh start far from Phoenix and the wreckage she'd left behind. I didn't wish her well or ill. I just didn't think about her much anymore. The space she'd occupied in my life had filled with other things. Work. Charlie. Lisa. The quiet satisfaction of a routine that belonged to me. One Saturday, Lisa asked if I'd ever think about moving out of the apartment. We were at the dog park, watching Charlie and her retriever chase each other in circles. I told her I hadn't thought that far ahead. She nodded, then said, "I think you'd like having a yard." For Charlie. I looked at the dogs, muddy and happy, and realized she was right. That evening, I started looking at rental houses online. Nothing extravagant, just places with a little more space, a patch of grass Charlie could call his own. It felt like the next logical step, not because I was running from anything, but because I was building towards something. The difference mattered. By spring, I'd moved into a small house on the west side. 2 bedrooms, a fenced yard, a garage where I could actually park instead of using it for storage. Charlie loved it immediately, spending hours sniffing every corner of the yard like he was cataloging his new kingdom. Lisa helped me move, along with Marcus and Joel. We hauled boxes and furniture while the Arizona heat reminded us why people move in winter. That night, after everyone had left, I stood in the backyard with a beer and watched Charlie dig a hole near the fence. The sky was clear, stars just starting to appear. I thought about the dashcam footage that had started everything. The collision. The affair. The trial. All of it felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. I wasn't the same person who'd installed that dashcam. I was someone who'd learned that evidence matters, that accountability matters, that walking away from what breaks you is sometimes the only way to heal. The house wasn't much, but it was mine. The dog was mine. The quiet evenings and slow mornings were mine. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Lisa came over for dinner the following week. I grilled chicken that turned out better than expected, and we ate on the patio while the dogs sprawled at our feet. She asked if I was happy. I thought about it, really thought about it, and said I was getting there. She smiled and said that was a good place to start. The dashcam still sat in my truck, recording every drive. I didn't check it as often anymore, but I kept it running out of habit. Some things become part of you, even after the reason for them fades. It was a reminder that the truth surfaces eventually, that patience and evidence outlast lies. Brian had learned that. Emma had learned that. And I'd learned that sometimes the hardest part of moving forward is trusting that you deserve to. 6 months into living at the house, I stopped checking the dashcam footage altogether. The habit had faded along with the hypervigilance that came after everything unraveled. Charlie had turned the backyard into his personal domain, complete with several unauthorized excavation sites near the fence that I filled in each weekend only to find them reopened by Monday. Lisa came over most weekends now, sometimes staying through Sunday, her golden retriever claiming the spot on the couch Charlie had declared his own. They'd worked out an arrangement that involved taking turns and occasionally sharing space in a pile of fur and contentment. Work remained steady, which meant good in my line of business. No drama, no crisis, just the regular rhythm of freight moving across state lines and drivers calling in with the usual complaints about traffic or loading dock delays. Joel retired in March, throwing a party at the same bar where we'd had the holiday gathering. He gave a short speech about spending more time with his grandkids and less time worrying about bill of ladings. I shook his hand and told him he'd earned it. Marcus took his position, which meant I got a new coworker who didn't know my history. That felt like a gift. Lisa and I never had a conversation about what we were. We just kept showing up for each other in small ways that built into something solid. She'd text me photos of funny things her students said. I'd send her pictures of Charlie's latest backyard destruction. We had dinner together twice a week, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. When her car wouldn't start one morning, I picked her up without her having to ask. When I mentioned needing to repaint the kitchen, she showed up the next Saturday with brushes and a better color choice than I'd selected. People who've rebuilt after loss understand this approach. You don't rush. You don't force. You let things grow at their own pace and trust that if it's right, it'll hold. By summer, she had a drawer at my place. By fall, I had one at hers. Neither of us made announcements or changed our relationship status online. We just lived our lives with a little more overlap each month. Brian got out of jail in November, 10 months into his sentence. Detective Martinez called to let me know, a courtesy he didn't have to extend but appreciated anyway. He said Brian had completed his time without incident and was starting probation. The no-contact order remained in effect, which meant Brian wasn't supposed to come within 500 feet of me. Martinez said most people learn their lesson after jail time. Most, but not all. I thanked him and filed the information away without dwelling on it. Emma never reached out again after that letter. I heard through the same mutual acquaintance that she was engaged to someone in Colorado, a guy who worked in finance or consulting, something that required suits and frequent travel. The news didn't sting the way I thought it might. It just existed, a fact about someone I used to know. I hoped she was happy in whatever way she understood happiness. That felt generous without being dishonest. The holidays came around again, but this time I had plans. Lisa invited me to her parents' place for Thanksgiving, and I said yes. Her family was loud in the comfortable way, the kind of chaos that comes from people who genuinely like each other. Her dad asked about my work, her mom insisted I take home leftovers, and her younger brother challenged me to a game of darts in the garage that I lost badly. It felt normal, like being grafted onto a family tree that had room for one more branch. Christmas morning, Lisa showed up at my door with coffee in a wrapped box. We'd agreed on small gifts, nothing extravagant. I gave her a leather journal she'd mentioned wanting. She gave me a new collar for Charlie with his name embroidered in thick letters. We spent the morning on the couch, dogs between us, watching terrible holiday movies and eating cinnamon rolls she'd baked the night before. It was quiet and perfect in a way that required no explanation. By January, I realized I'd stopped thinking about the dashcam as evidence. It was just a camera again, recording drives out of habit and practicality. The footage it captured now was mundane. Commutes. Grocery runs. The occasional road trip with Lisa where we'd sing off-key to songs from the 90s and pretend we still knew all the words. The collision, the affair, the trial, all of it had receded into the past where it belonged. One afternoon, Marcus asked if I'd ever consider dating seriously again. We were in the warehouse, double-checking a shipment manifest, and the question came out of nowhere. I told him I already was. His eyebrows went up. The teacher? I nodded. He grinned. Good for you, man. You deserve that. The conversation moved on, but his words stuck with me. Deserving hadn't been part of my vocabulary for a long time. Maybe it was time to reconsider. Lisa brought up the future first. We were sitting on her patio one evening, the kind of Arizona spring night where the temperature finally drops below oppressive. She asked if I'd ever thought about what came next for us. I admitted I had but wasn't sure how to bring it up. She laughed and said that was very me. We talked for hours, about what we wanted, what scared us, what we weren't willing to compromise on. By the end of the night, we'd agreed we were in this for real, whatever that meant going forward. Moving in together happened gradually. First, it was staying over more nights than not. Then it was consolidating duplicate items, keeping one coffee maker and donating the other. By summer, we'd started looking at places big enough for both of us, 2 dogs, and the life we were building. We found a house in August, nothing fancy but solid, with a yard twice the size of my rental and enough space that we wouldn't trip over each other. The closing took 6 weeks, during which Lisa made spreadsheets and I pretended to understand them. Moving day was hot and chaotic. Marcus and his wife helped, along with 2 of Lisa's teacher friends who showed up with snacks and unnecessary amounts of enthusiasm. We hauled boxes and furniture while the dogs ran through the empty rooms, claiming territory with the seriousness of generals surveying battlefields. By evening, we were too tired to cook, so we ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor surrounded by unpacked boxes. Lisa looked at me across the mess and said this was perfect. I agreed because it was. The dashcam came with me to the new house, still mounted in my truck, still recording. I thought about taking it down once, but Lisa said I should keep it. You never know when you'll need proof, she said. Not in a paranoid way, just practical. I appreciated that she understood. Some things aren't about the past. They're about being prepared for whatever comes next. Brian's name came up one last time, almost a year after he'd been released. Marcus mentioned he'd seen him at a gas station, looking thinner and older, pumping gas into a sedan that had seen better days. They'd made eye contact briefly, and Brian had looked away first. Marcus said it seemed like jail had taken something out of him, some arrogance or certainty he'd carried before. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I just felt indifferent, which seemed like the healthiest response. By the second anniversary of the collision, I'd stopped marking the date entirely. It had been March 14th, a Thursday, the kind of detail that used to matter but didn't anymore. Life had filled in around the wound until it was just scar tissue, something I carried but didn't feel. Lisa and I were planning a trip to California, a week on the coast with the dogs, our first real vacation together. She'd booked a dog-friendly rental, and I'd mapped out hiking trails that allowed pets. It felt like the kind of future I hadn't imagined possible 2 years ago. Work promoted me to regional supervisor, a position that came with more responsibility and a salary bump I'd needed but hadn't asked for. The new role meant less time in the warehouse and more time coordinating across multiple facilities. I missed the physical work sometimes, the satisfaction of solving problems with your hands, but the promotion felt like recognition that I'd held things together when my personal life was falling apart. That mattered. Charlie turned 5, according to the vet's best guess. We celebrated with a new toy and extra treats, which he accepted with the dignity of a dog who knew he was loved. Lisa's golden retriever, Sadie, had become his constant companion, and they developed a routine that involved synchronized naps and coordinated begging during meals. Watching them together reminded me that families come in unexpected configurations, and that's okay. Lisa started talking about marriage in the abstract. Not proposals or timelines, just the concept, testing the waters to see how I felt. I told her I wasn't against it but wanted to make sure we were both ready, that we'd built something strong enough to carry that weight. She understood, said there was no rush, that what we had was already solid. That conversation felt more intimate than any proposal could have been, the honesty of two people checking in without fear of the answer. The house became home in the way places do when you stop treating them as temporary. We painted the walls colors we actually liked. We planted a garden that mostly failed but taught us about Arizona soil. We hosted dinners for friends and family, the kind of gatherings where people stayed late and nobody wanted to be the first to leave. The life I'd stumbled into after everything collapsed had turned into something I'd choose if given the option. One evening, I found myself in the garage, organizing tools I'd accumulated over the years. I came across a box I'd packed during the divorce and never opened. Inside were photos from my marriage to Emma, framed pictures I'd taken down from the old house. I looked through them briefly, seeing younger versions of ourselves smiling at cameras, unaware of what was coming. I didn't feel anger or regret. I just saw two people who'd tried and failed, which happens more often than anyone wants to admit. I kept one photo, a candid from early in our relationship where we both looked genuinely happy. Not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder that it had been real once, even if it didn't last. The rest I boxed back up and stored in the garage rafters, not thrown away but not displayed either. Some things deserve acknowledgement without requiring daily attention. Lisa found me in the garage and asked what I was doing. I showed her the photo I'd kept and explained why. She looked at it, then at me, and said she was glad I could remember the good parts. That meant I was healing, she said. I realized she was right. The dashcam had given me evidence when I needed it, but I didn't need it to define me anymore. The truth had surfaced. Justice had been served. And I'd built a new life from the wreckage, piece by piece, day by day, until the past became just that, something behind me instead of something crushing me. Brian was out there somewhere, living with his choices. Emma was out there too, building whatever future she'd chosen. And I was here, in a house I loved, with a woman I respected, and two dogs who didn't care about any of the history that had brought me to this moment. People ask if I ever regret installing the dashcam, if I wish I'd stayed ignorant. The answer is no. Not knowing doesn't make betrayal hurt less. It just makes you doubt yourself when you finally discover it. The camera gave me clarity, and clarity gave me options, and options gave me the chance to walk away with my dignity intact. That's what I tell people now when they ask for advice. Document the truth. Trust what you see. And when the time comes to choose between staying in the wreckage and building something new, choose the build. It's harder, lonelier, and scarier. But on the other side of that work is a life you actually want to live, not one you're just surviving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.